thewellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives. This is Up for a Chat with Cindy O'Meara, Karen Smith, and Kim Morrison.
Here we are, up for a chat about the hottest topics that are important to you, inspiring you to awaken the change within. I'm Kim Morrison.
I'm Cindy O'Meara.
And I'm Karen Smith.
Which is quite cute, really, us changing it up a little bit. And this week, we are super excited because we have a very special guest on the show, Charlie Arnott. Now, this is interesting because Cindy recently spoke at Burrawa this year, and she had found out by somebody that there was a gentleman there that had a regenerative farm nearby. And, of course, Cindy's ears would have pricked up at that and wanted and insisted that she met the amazing Charlie Arnott. She stalked him and found him online. She has been chasing him ever since. And so I would say it's her new boyfriend online. And we are incredibly proud. Welcome to the show, gorgeous Charlie.
This is a very public announcement of our friendship, isn't it?
Very public.
Hello, girls. Lovely to be speaking with you today.
Oh, it's a privilege for us. And I think it would be apt for us to, first of all, start off, Charlie. Perhaps you could give us a little bit of a background into your story before we bring Cindy in to talk to you. Just tell us what led you to going from having a farm, your journey, how you've handled maybe droughts. Just where are you at? Who are you? And tell us, what's your story?
My story? Well, I'll start at the beginning. I grew up at Burrawa in Southwest Slopes of New South Wales, and in a farming family situation, we have and still have a mixed farm enterprise of Burrawa, and you'd say it was very conventional. We had lots of enterprises, lots of inputs, lots of use of chemical, certainly fertilisers and animal husbandry type products. So high input, high output, and as I said, very, very typical of Burrawa, and I guess that to me was very normal. I didn't know any other way of farming, to be honest. So that was in my early days. I went away to school. I went to university and did a rural science degree at Armidale at UNE, and again that was very, I guess, conventional in the sense it was science-based. So lots of agronomy, lots of genetics, lots of all that sort of hardcore conventional ag type stuff, which was fine. It was 4 hard years of study. And then I left school. I left the university, took a few years off, and then I went back to Burrawa. So this is probably 22, 3 years ago, again, to manage our farm down there. So, as I said, managing it very conventionally. That's when I was a child, that's how we did it. So, that's how I managed it when I started. And then sometime, I guess it was probably 7, 8 years later, and things were going well. We were doing well. We were winning the odd wheat competition and sort of local competitions for this and that, and reasonably innovative with our cropping, using different technologies, new technologies like chemical shearing was something we tried. But again, all very conventional, and we were really busy. So, and I thought that's what farming is all about. And then about in 2004, I saw an ad in the paper in Burrawa, and it said, this is in the few years into the millennial drought, and it said profiting from the drought. And of course, I read the headline and thought, this has got to be a joke. So it was a day-long course in town. I went along, and it really changed my life because I didn't know what to expect. But what I did learn and what I understood was that I probably wasn't asking myself the right kind of questions. In fact, I probably wasn't really asking myself questions at all, because I was in a particular mindset and I had particular paradigms around what farming was about, and also, which was really I guess, one of the more interesting things about what I was about. I sort of identified as a farmer, and that can be a reasonably narrow point of view, to be just looking at the world just as a farmer. And I certainly was a farmer, but that one day really made me think, what else is there? Not just in my life, but certainly, from a farming point of view and health and food. I remember the guy who was running the course. We sort of drove up the road to get a pie for lunch or something, and he said, that's all fine. And we had to chat about the morning's work. And he said, are you happy? And I sort of said, well, I'm not unhappy. But it was, when I reflect on it, it was a pretty woeful, answer. So then that led me to do a week-long course called Grazing For Profit. And that really set me down the path of holistic farm management, looking at my business and my life as a whole, not just breaking things into parts and dealing with things one thing at a time. Which is, essentially this holistic management is exactly, it is looking at the whole and understanding and being considerate of all the moving parts and how they work together. So, and then that was the beginning of my journey, I guess. So what's that? 15 years ago. I met my wife a couple of years after that, and she was very, she was doing organics, feeding her children organics. She had 2 young daughters at the time, and she still has. They're a bit older now, but so organic was just normal for her. And so that combined with my ongoing education and really understanding, different ways of doing of being a farmer and farming, that really, I guess, accelerated my trajectory to regenerative agriculture, which is what it wasn't called back then. It was, I guess, there was a bit of talk of sustainable agriculture and that sort of thing. So, and it's a sort of information that, you can't unhear it. You can't sort of you can't ignore it. Once you know and you understand and you start, as I say, asking yourself better questions, you find better answers, and then you just can't go back to conventional ag. I couldn't. So we stopped using chemical very early on, about 15 years ago. We stopped using fertilizers. We stopped using all sorts of vaccinations and drenches. We went cold turkey, and which has its drawbacks. I wouldn't recommend that to anyone, but I'd recommend a bit of a transition. But I was, a bit of a cold turkey kind of guy, so really jumped on board. And so, look, since then, the last 15 years, we simplified our farming. We started selling our products to straight, direct to our customers and to butcher shops. We put on biodynamic workshops, 1 and 2 day introduction to biodynamics workshops. We just finished one last week at Bathurst. Hamish Mackay is our educator, and we both facilitate those workshops. So we're really, we're selling food, and we're providing services in terms of, teaching other farmers biodynamics. And I guess that, the selling the food bit sort of, I guess a point to dwell on for a second. I say to people that a real turning point in my life and my career as a farmer was, the minute I stopped considering that as a farmer I'm producing a commodity, and we were growing wool and beef and lamb. The minute I sort of thought about the responsibility I had as a farmer to the people who were consuming the food I was producing, and I started thinking, well, I'm actually growing food that people are going to eat. And before that, it was just spray it with chemical, keep it alive, sell it, put it on a truck and away it goes, with no real consideration for where it was going to end up, as long as I was paid. To then going, well, look, I'm actually contributing significantly to people's health or ill health, and their well-being. So, I guess that was one of the real, as I said, turning points in my consciousness around my role and my job as a farmer. So, it how do we go? Is that the?
Yeah.
Is that?
No,
Is that
Kelly,
right?
I think that turning point where you realise that you're creating food for people that were either going to make them sick or well. And I just wish more and more farmers would start to realise that. So, my mother's from the cornfields of Iowa, and I go over there and I have a look at what they're doing over there, and it's just a constant spraying of chemicals. And even my uncle, who's a pig farmer, back when I was 15 and 16 and working in the pig farm, I never realised the cruelty of what I was seeing and what I was witnessing. It just was normal to me. So both in the cornfields and the pig farms, I had first-hand experience, and that was back in the 70s and the 80s. And I go back there now, and all of my family have lost their farms. They don't have them anymore. And it was because of the chemical revolution that happened. And I don't know if they realise that they're producing food for humans and that it is a matter of for health or for sickness, in sickness and in health. That's what it is. And I just am so excited that that's what you got. Now, I know that I want to go here because I think I thought it was really interesting that both you and Kim were in Europe in the lavender farms, and you were learning about, I guess, agriculture in Europe, and Kim was there smelling the lavender. So what I would love you to talk about is, what did you learn? Is there anything new in Europe, and not just on lavender, but in agriculture, that you learned in that couple of months that you spent and put on your Instagram and made me very jealous like Kim?
Well, that's a great question. I guess what I learned was that what's normal for Italians is not normal for us. What's normal for them is using every square foot of land they have to grow food. And where we stayed on the farms we stayed for a week or so at a time. Most, not, just over the fence. So they're very. That's not. We talk about it here a lot in Australia because that's what we all want to do and that's what we're striving for. But in there, it's like, what? Yeah, of course, that's just how we operate. I mean, I didn't hear the word regenerative agriculture once because I think a lot of their agriculture already is, and it's like that's normal for them to be using the resources on their properties. Growing lots of food. They're preserving their food. They're selling it locally. It's healthy. I mean, we ate so much pasta and bread. I'd be in hospital if I had eaten that much in Australia. But the quality of the pasta and bread and the ancient grains they're using to produce that, it's got like 20% of the gluten that is in our wheat in Australia in the flour we're using. So again, that's normal for them. They haven't. There wasn't an industry of hybridizing, selective breeding of wheat for basically for economic, with economic sort of KPIs in mind. They were growing it for its nutritional value, and that's just something that a lot of food isn't grown for in Australia. Like wheat, it's grown, dwarf variety so it doesn't fall over, high protein to make bread, lots of gluten, who cares? Storing quality of fruit and vegetables, it's, we're really off target. We're trying to get there, but the Italians it's just normal. So that was the food, the culture, their attitude to life. We really slowed down as well, which is a real lesson in just living and being present to what we were doing. Of course, we were on holidays, and even though our schedule was reasonably hectic, we were really. It was a great circuit breaker, and I think that's another thing we learned was the importance of, and farmers don't talk about it, just self-care. The fact that we was like, it was like, I guess it was family care. We all went as a family, so we were just all deep in the culture of Italy, and of course, just the wonderful landscape. And I guess, and my wife Angelica certainly would support this notion that, I guess one of the biggest take homes was the people. which obviously contribute to the culture and the vibe of the whole country, but just their willingness to share, willingness to help, willingness to open the doors of their farms and show us what they're doing. And, they were some of our best memories or fondest memories were, some of the producers there. We went to a biodynamic orchard, a biodynamic vineyard. One place we went to in Marquet up there, we went to, they did, olive oil and wine, and amazing honey. It's just, we came back with this, just invigorated about, we got to grow more food. And I guess this is interesting because when I met Angelica, many years ago, and she's Italian and her father's from Sicily. First time he came to our farm at Bura, he said, "Where's the food?" Literally, he said, "Why aren't you growing pumpkins in that paddock?" And now I get it. Having been there and just really immersed ourselves in the culture, it's such an important. It's a responsibility, but it's like, why aren't we growing more food? And why don't we have more fruit trees? So. And of course, the lavender is just amazing. So we're inspired to grow more lavender, more fruit trees, and all those other wonderful Mediterranean herbs and trees. Yeah.
You touched on something that I think is really imperative around the European culture. I've just got back myself, Charlie, and in Spain and in France. And what blew me away going to the different farms or different places we visited was that real village community feel, which you've touched on. And it was almost like part of their culture and tradition is that you've got each other's back. No one would go hungry, I would imagine, over there. No one would be left on their own. And I think that's what I really took in the way that they actually, and I'm not a farming expert by any stretch of the imagination, but through what I've learned from Cindy and Karen and our podcast, and certainly people like yourself, was that cross, I guess, the diversity. So having chooks and having different fruits and having different plants planted, and the way they grew the lavender, like people would say, oh, how could you stand in the fields with all those bees? And to actually stand there, and I came up with a new word, you might like to take it on and share this with your community. I think it's quite profound, but I think the word huzzing. So the bees were humming and buzzing, so I called it huzzing accidentally. But what was so beautiful is the bees were not aggressive. That maybe it was because they were around lavender, and lavender, as we know, is very calming, but it was just that looking at the ground, and these places didn't get a lot of rain in many ways, and yet the plants were thriving. And we went to a vineyard where they didn't have, and I don't know the correct terms, but the vines didn't go high, but they altered it because of the way that the winds came and how they listened to their environment is what I'm getting to. They seemed to really communicate with one another what had happened over generations. Is that something that you noticed or is perhaps missing here in Australia, that we've become so secluded in what we're doing instead of sharing that information? Is that something that would be correct?
I totally agree. I guess, the Italians are indigenous to Italy, and I know that's an obvious thing to say, but they have been there for thousands of years, and and that's why they are so in tune. They're so, as you say, they're very community minded. They're producing a huge amount of food in reasonably adverse situations. I know we're in the middle of a drought here in Australia, but some of the places we went to has half the rainfall that we might have at Burua, say, but just the abundance of food because of the sort of the stacking of enterprises and the recycling of waste and those again very normal practices that they do there. They are able to retain moisture in their soil and grow a huge amount of food and be really happy. And as far as from a health point of view, we just didn't see big people in Italy. When we saw big people, they were clearly tourists. So that says a lot for their well-being, the food they're eating, the food they're producing.
Charlie, I've never drunk so much wine and eaten so much bread. And yet I came back with 100 grams on my weight. I thought I would come back a 10-ton Tessie. And the last that we had, the long 2-hour lunches that you would have, they would eat late at night over there, which I found interesting because I just don't like eating late here. But we would eat late at night. They were long meals with lots of greens and homegrown tomatoes that didn't look perfect, but they tasted insane. Amazing. We had rosé or wine with every meal that was grown by one of the neighbours. And why are we lacking this in Australia and down under?
Well, it's a great question. I guess, whilst we are a very diverse culture, and we're a melting pot of different cultures, I guess that may, whilst that brings to the table a lot of different options, maybe that's something in the fact that we don't have a standard sort of practice or standard attitude or standard culture that they have, which, as you say, they generally don't eat breakfast. They have their late dinners, they drink lots of wine, and they eat amazing food, and they're not fat. I don't think any of those points relate to Australia at all. We eat huge breakfasts. I think we just recently overtaken the US in terms of the obesity rates and all the other diseases that we're racking up. A lot of the food we are eating is processed and rubbish, and we don't know where it's come from, and it's probably come from outside of the continent. So, we have so much to learn, and I guess that's why we're having this conversation, isn't it? We're trying to highlight to people, and using the example of Italy, highlight to people the benefits to their own health, the environment, and even the economics of it. That's another whole conversation. Getting back to why my previous career as a farmer, or my old farming ways, we had an economic relationship with the landscape. Decisions we made were based around, how much we're going to make from it, how much did it cost, cutting corners. That's how we make decisions, and I'm absolutely positive that the agriculture generally in Italy, for instance, that is not their primary motivation for farming. Their primary motivation is production of wonderful food and family. That was the other big thing, is the culture of their core family members. And there was one place we stayed at. It was the 8th generation of farmers there. There was another one in Tuscany we didn't get to. 26 generations of winemakers. That's just insane. And I think so we don't obviously have that in Australia. There'll be a few. I'll be long gone by the time any farming families are reckoning with that many generations. But I think we have so much to learn. Maybe we should all go back to Italy on a regenerative ag farming tour, and start showing other people how it can be done. What do you reckon, girls?
We just all texted each other going, let's move to Italy. What do you think? How's this going to place for what are we at our own demise? Are we our own worst enemies down under? What do you see as the future down under?
Look, I think I'm very optimistic about the future of agriculture in Australia, and I always take it back to agriculture because that is, I think. Well, I don't think I know, and I feel that's the core. Getting that right, or changing our habits, about as farmers and as eaters, as I call them. I'm a feeder, and my clients are eaters. If we can change our habits, and they're the two biggest sides of the equation: the feeders and the eaters. If we can get farmers to understand the multiple benefits of, let's just call it, regenerative agriculture, and if we can highlight the benefits to the eaters of sourcing food straight from farmers, at least knowing where it's from, and making different choices and creating new buying and eating habits, then I think the future is bright. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but we're doing our darndest to train up. Essentially, we are training up as many farmers and gardeners and families in the practices of biodynamics, because when we do hit the wall, whether it's economically, environmentally, we're going to need practitioners, not just in the country on farms, but in the cities, in gardens, to grow food. When we are down to our last non-chemical bit of food or last square metre of dirt, I think really the only people who are going to successfully keep growing food are the ones who, I believe biodynamics is the thing that's going to really make the biggest difference to agriculture in Australia, because it's not about the economic benefits, even though there are. It's about restoring a relationship with the landscape and the food we eat. And it's not just, again, how to grow a carrot or how to grow a nice looking cow. It's about your place as an individual and that cow and that carrot's place in the whole picture and the whole landscape. So, look, it's not looking good. Disease is rampant, and we can talk about why we all think or know that's the case. And the environment is going backwards, I'd have to say, on the ledger. But I reckon we'll be okay. But we've got to start acting pretty smartly.
We sure do. There was a report done called The Food Revolution and Trends Disrupting the Food Industry, and they basically said the challenges was population growth, climate change, water access, and food waste. And the drivers of the change will be consumer demands and digital living. And they're talking about food innovation and talking about plant-based proteins, 3D food printing, and I'm floored that this is where they think that it's going to go.
No, and I'm not surprised that that's getting pumped out. I always say to people, you can't solve a biological problem with chemistry or physics or mechanisation. That's just, if whatever biological problem we want to identify, in small fry stuff or global stuff, biology, because that's essentially what's happening. It's the biology that of plants and animals in the atmosphere that's screwed up, and the water cycles and everything else. We need the solutions to those problems lie in the very things we're screwing up. We have the tools to do that. Paul Hawken he released a couple of years ago a wonderful book called Drawdown, and in that you might be aware he identified the 100 most effective methods of drawing down carbon and reducing carbon emissions and so on. And if it was a great book. Anyway, So if you group together all of the regenerative agriculture type practices that he's identified, being grazing management and permaculture and multi-species stuff, all sorts of different methods, if you put them together and put them under the umbrella of regenerative agriculture, then it's 2.4 times more effective than the very next method. So, to me, it's very clear that the sooner that farmers can adopt these practices, and the sooner that the eaters can support those practices, almost demand those practices, we will be so much further ahead than tweaking legislation and government policy, adopting and making crazy new technology and 3D printing and of food. That just is insane. And this whole lab meat debacle, it's just horrifying. So, I think it's really simple. And we as a race, we like to overcomplicate things because it makes us feel busy or important. I don't know what, but the solution is really simple. And and I always get back to the fact that we've got two big problems if we want to simplify the problems: environmental ill health and decline, and on a global scale, and the health of mankind. And they're both going to they're not good. And the solution, regenerative agriculture practices, it actually deals with both, like head on. So I don't know. It does frustrate me, but it does give me hope that we have got solutions. We have solutions out there. So I don't know.
The smart farming practices are vertical farming, lab-grown food, algae agriculture, and components of the fourth industrial revolution, including big data and AI, can reduce resource use, boost yields, and improve crop resilience. So it scares me. We've gotten to this point, Charlie, and you had a wake-up call in 2004, and I know there's more farmers having wake-up calls. But the people that are financing this, and this is a finance journal that I'm getting this from, are our big venture capitalists, people like, I'm trying to think of who I've seen in there that is financing it. But they're like the big companies. Bayer is one of them that sees plant-based meats as the new way, and that's plant-based meats. But this lab meat, I was reading some information about it today, and in food additives, they're using fetuses, and people don't realise it. Use it in the research, and they're going to use some sort of cell culture, I don't know what, to make this lab meat, which is at this point, I was watching a video on it. It's realistic in that it is possibly going to happen. When are the people going to rise up and support somebody like you or me, who has 60 small acres in Mullaney, but would love people to say, hey, will you grow our food, Cindy, or can we buy your cattle? But we have a government that then goes, no, you have to sterilise all your lettuces before you sell it to the public. No, you can't butcher your cow on your property. No, you cannot give unpasteurised milk. And so we're stuck between, a rock and a hard place.
Well, I think that the main driver of all of that is money, and yes, money is involved in everyone and everything. However, when it becomes the primary, the primary function or the primary consideration in business, then that's when we run into trouble. So for everyone for regenerative farmers. It's a wonderful business model because you're reducing your inputs, you're simplifying your business, you're living in a much healthier environment for yourself and your family. You're doing wonderful things for the environment, and you're producing clean, nutritious food. That is a terrible business model for everyone else that those businesses used to support before. The people I used to buy fertilizer from and chemical from. If you're selling your animals direct to customers, you're not using the same agents or as many agents to sell and buy stock as you used to. It's sort of because the big end of town who's making money out of the current business model of farming and ill health don't want to have a bar of this because it basically erodes and it doesn't support profits and shareholder shareholder demands. So, and the government is we might as well forget about them, to be honest, I believe, in the short to medium term, because of vested interests, if not personally, then with the parties and with the industry. The industries are very strong. Whether they be the feedlot industry, whether they be Bayer and Monsanto and those sort of things. There's a lot of, and even research in university. This is a huge conversation, but so many. Well, I have to say all universities' research is reliant upon grants from, if not government, from private companies, which are clearly creating studies which support the sale of products. I can't be any clearer than that. So, who are we to believe? And I think that really it's the dollars that is keeping the wheels of conventional industrial farming turning, and that's it's a big task we have to change that around. But I think, as I said, for farmers who are considering a change, what I emphasise is and this drought's a great example of this, that there's a push away from conventional ag. That they are economically there's some big stuff going down. they are, needing to extend their overdrafts, or they're getting funds from the government, and they're getting handouts of hay and all sorts of things, which is fine because it's keeping them going. However, it's a pretty unattractive and unsustainable situation for a lot of farmers. So there's sort of, for some, or for many more, I hope, I trust, they'll be wanting to get away from that current situation. So I believe there's a real push away from conventional agriculture. And the wonderful thing is there's a pull, there's a drag, there's this attraction to regenerative agriculture because it offers solutions, So, and there's, whether that be engaging more with the people they're selling their food to, environmental outcomes, financial outcomes, sense of well-being. So, we're in this wonderful, I believe, have this wonderful opportunity, and that we have this situation where there's, farmers are being pushed away in droves from traditional conventional agriculture for all those reasons that you explained. But they've actually got somewhere to go to, so there's sort of, and to me, it's not a question of they don't have enough information to make a decision. There is oodles of information out there. I mean, Google, you spend 5 minutes and you'll have a raft of information about the benefits of regenerative agriculture. As I say to people, the first paddock people have to change is the one between their ears. They've got to get their head around the benefits and the benefits are obvious. It's more they've got to get their head around this whole thing about change, and the stigma of change and the breaking the paradigms. And that's what was, I guess, easy for me to do, because I had a network of other farmers I was learning and educating myself with, that created this wonderful support network of people to go on this ride. So, yeah. So I can't even remember what question you asked me.
But how could we, if the ratio, I don't know what the ratio is, are we talking 90-10 in regenerative farming here in Australia? What's the ratio? Do you know?
That's a great question. I will have to find that out, because you've made me start thinking now. I don't know. We haven't reached a tipping point yet, because I think there will be a tipping point where people will, there'll be too many fences they've looked over and green fields they've seen when theirs is not. Just the conversations down the pub will start changing, So I'd love to know what it is. Maybe it's 90-10. I think that, there's probably, I guess there's hectares of of area managed, and there's also this number of farms. And I'd say a lot of the smallholders are probably thinking this already, because I think, they may not have the economic pressures of banks breathing down their neck, but they're also probably moved to that sort of smaller holding situation because they're looking for a tree change, and their background is not. They're not dragging baggage, farming baggage to their situation. It's hard for farmers to basically change their identity. But for someone who's, a school teacher in Sydney who wants to go, on a farm and do something at Burrawa, that's, they just don't have the paradigms to bust.
What do you think it is for a farmer? What was the change in you? I mean, I think you've said a couple of things around perhaps behind every good man is a good woman, and vice versa. But for you to actually take the courage to go to that class that was open about making a profit from the drought, how do we get all the 90% that perhaps aren't doing regenerative farming to at least open up for the conversation? You say to change the paddock between the ears, but how do you get to them?
Well, look, for me, I guess it was I just had enough years. I guess I reached a point of maturity that, I wasn't necessarily looking to, I guess I'd been a farmer in that way for a number of years, and not that it wasn't working, but I got to the point where I didn't need to try and keep proving myself and keep smacking my head against a wall. I got to, something in me said that it has to change. And probably it was when I was asked, "Are you happy?" And I went, "Well, I'm not unhappy." It's like, really? Wow! That to me was as I said, one of the turning points. You know, I don't know, just finding a support network really helped me as well. You know, and I think farmers often, and especially in the traditional, industrial ag, there's a lot of competition, and we tend to isolate ourselves because we're coveting our IP or our methods because it's really competitive. Because there's, we could lose money if someone else sells their cows for more than us or something. So there's this real sense of competition which doesn't exist in the regenerative ag space. I've found it's very collegiate and very sharing. So there's not the that sort of competition that keeps people isolated. And so and look, every year that goes by, I mean, what I learned back in 2004 had been in Australia for probably 15 years. So there were others that were far, greater pioneers than I. I just happened to sort of come, midway there and land myself in a situation where there was already some support. There were already some pioneers that I could call mentors. And so, and that's, every year that goes by, there are more people who are setting standards in agriculture that people can look up to. And again, we're creating a new normal. So, I think, and for me, thinking about a family, thinking about me getting older and my health. When you're young and fit, like you're invincible. But running off a paddock after playing football, and you get sore every year goes by, you get a bit sore. You start thinking about, well, how long have I got, and what am I doing to my body? So, how the food I was eating, that for me changed as well. So, there's, I guess everyone is individual, and one of my jobs is to give every farmer that might come across me or the work we do or a similar work that others are doing, having on the table the tools and the thinking and the psychology that's going to be a touch point for any farmer, for anything they need, any sensitive spot they have, and be able to, as I say, give people a soft landing into regenerative agriculture. So the question is a wonderful one, and I don't have all the answers, but I guess from my experience, that was mine, and I guess I said, everyone's going to have a different sort of a touch point or sensitivity to this information. So
I think so. One of the other key things you mentioned was self-care, and Cindy texted me that's something I'm very passionate about, given the suicide rate, which I know Karen, although she's lost her sound, would also be interested in. From the point of view, what are your top tips on self-care for all of us, even though we're not farmers? What would be your top tips on self-care?
Well, I'm a terrible meditator, but I understand the benefits of meditation. That's something I'm going to focus more on in the future, personally, and also just as a tool. So that's meditation is definitely one. And Zach Bush, who I know you guys follow and know reasonably well, he has this breathe your biome sort of tagline, which I think is wonderful. So actually being present to the wonderful, to nature and your landscape, and that can be a farmer or it can be someone in the city or anything. So I think that's another, just being present to your world and appreciating that you are part of the world. Hamish Mackay's got a wonderful expression, and there is that old expression, you are what you eat, and he says, well, it really should be you eat what you are. It's you're really in control of your own mind and your own thinking and your own behaviours. And when you're feeling like crap, you eat crap food. And when you're feeling good, you'll actually have the motivation to go and eat good food. So I think that all these things obviously go hand in hand. I think another sort of psychological. Sorry,
I was just going to add something there, Charlie. You are what your food eats, plant and animal.
Yeah. You are what your food eats.
I think that's more powerful, because you know, you can eat a fruit, you can eat a vegetable, you can eat animals, but if those animals are eating foods laced with glyphosate and those plants are being sprayed with glyphosate, and I'm just saying glyphosate is one because there's chlorpyrifos, there's dicamba, there's 2,4-D, there's all of these chemicals that are out there. And if you're eating those foods, then you're not going to be well. There's just no way you can be well. And I love your optimism, Charlie. I'm sorry, but I'm going the other way at the moment, and I really need to listen to you more. I'm becoming very disheartened that people aren't listening and understanding the importance of consuming the food that you are talking about. But what's happening is it's an elitist food. Like my son, let's just take my son, for instance. He grows the food on the farm at Changing Habits. But we had to go to Victoria. Yeah. I went to the organic place in Victoria where we were, and he kept whispering to me, "Mum, it's cheaper at Woolworths. Mum, it's cheaper at Woolworths." And I just kept saying, "Honey, I'm not prepared to, support them." But I did go into Woolworths at this place because there was only 2 shops in town, the organic shop and Woolworths. And I was surprised at how much Woolworths had certified organic in the way of meat, not so much fruit and vegetables, but their meat and their processed foods, as you could say. So, how do we get this food so the true cost of it shines through, because you're a carbon sequester, you're part of the climate change solution, not the problem, whereas your neighbour, and I've been to Burrawa and I've seen those landscapes that are filled with thistle and bare land, and then I've seen your land, I've seen pictures of your land, and it's stunning, and that's like a fence line apart. I don't understand how we can teach people this. I want your optimism back.
Well, you know what? I'm optimistic, but I'm planning for the worst. I think I'm planning for the worst, hoping for the best.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what I said before, that we need people, farmers who have not just the ability to grow organic food. Truth be known, I've tasted some pretty horrible organic food because there's organic by default. You take chemical use out of organic or growing food, you've got food, and that's great without chemical, but it doesn't mean it's nutritiously dense. It doesn't mean it's necessarily better for you from a nutritional point of view. So, I guess.
Nutrient dense.
Yeah, and I guess back to my point about you eat what you eat what you are, and I say that because why does someone put a bit of food in their mouth that has chemical on it that's been grown conventionally? They're bought in the supermarket. When they put it in their mouth, they've actually before that they've bought that food because they're not thinking properly, but they are thinking in a way that is not conducive to their own well-being. So when we can, when we can, highlight the benefits of what I'm doing, what other people are doing, and and I know buying habits are mainly based around price and convenience, and supermarkets are cheap and convenient, But the thing is that is really frustrating is the environment is subsidising the cost of that food, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like no one's, and everyone is delaying the pain. They'll pay for cheap food now because it's convenient and it's cheap and it tastes okay because it's full of sugar.
And flavour.
And flavours and all sorts of other horrible things. But it is to their detriment because they are not going to escape. They're going to be paying for that. They're going to be paying, financially, in terms of ill health later on. As touched on before, we've got this Monsanto who is, bought by Bayer now. What a convenient acquisition that they're creating disease by producing crap food or helping people make crap food. But voila, they've got the solutions for every illness under the sun. It's a wonderful business model. And that's what people are just so used to doing. Again, that is normal for them to eat crap food and go to the doctor every second day. And I say, I ask people, do they have a doctor and do they know them well? And yes, and how often do you see them? Every 6 months. Like, well, I ask them, who's your farmer? And they look at me like I've got two heads. And it's like, what do you mean? I go, well, how often do you farmer? 3 times a day. So, it's such a multi-pronged attack we've got to have on the eaters. It's got to be economic. They've got to understand the value of food. The environment can't keep subsidising it. They've got to understand the detrimental effects that this crap food's having on their health and their children. I mean, if people happy to put crap food in their own mouths, hopefully they don't want to put crap food in the mouths of their children. And there's this other, the benefits of just getting back in touch with nature. I think that's the toughest one, because there's a large part of the population who do not care about nature, never want to go to a farm, never will, and that's fine. And we may never get them. We may never capture them. But there's a huge part of the population that I think is on the tipping point of just getting it, and that's why it's so important to do work with schools. And when the kids start asking mum and dad about food and, involve themselves in the purchasing choices, I think that's a powerful tool, Get them when they're young. And make that normal. Make it normal for kids to visit a farm. Make them normal to ask mum and dad for organic food, and make it normal for them to be growing food in their own school. Thank God there is this intergenerational change that we can take advantage of. The attitudes, whilst culturally and generationally they often stay the same, we have this opportunity to engage with these kids when they're young, and it's for their own bloody good. At the end of the day. I think you sometimes wish you could, you need parents to have licenses to have kids, because some of the stuff I see is horrifying. The things I see them put in their mouths. That's another whole conversation.
But Charlie, what's interesting is that I had a friend who said to me, "I really want you to come around to my house." So we did a contra. He came and cleaned my computer out, and I went and cleaned his pantry and fridge out, and his wife and children were there with us. And I explained, like every food had a flavour, a colour, a citric acid, or an acidity regulator, a filler, a binder. That's what the foods were. It was inconceivable what it was. And I said, look, all you have to do is make one mayonnaise and then put wasabi in a little bit of one, and it's not hard. I spoke to him about 4 months after I'd been there, and I said, how did you go? Have you changed your pantry over? Have you done the things I talked about? And he said, no, my wife's not on board and she doesn't want to do it. This is me going in there for 2 hours and showing them and explaining this thing to them. That's one thing. And then another thing, I'm speaking to some of the big CEOs of the biggest food producers here in Australia. Biggest.
Cool.
And they basically are looking to make healthier. They know what's happening in Australia. They know there's sickness in the kids, there's obesity, there's dementia, there's all this stuff is happening. And they know that food is going to start to be taxed. So they're asking me to help them with healthier options. So I start right in on the natural flavours. And they said, well, Cindy, that's chapter 14. Let's just start at chapter 1.
What's driving them to come to you? Do you think it's an economic, like they've got to jump on the bandwagon because everyone's going to start buying healthy food and there's money to be made, or are they really sincere in there? Do they have a sound moral compass that's driving them towards you to get help?
I actually not sure. I think they believe they've got to start making healthier options. But when you have I looked at the ingredients of one of their products and I deciphered it for them and I went through it all, and it was just a cookie. That's all it was. But there was no cookie there. It was all flavours and colours and margarine instead of butter. And I put it down to the basic recipe of a cookie. I went flour, butter, sugar, salt, but let's do good quality. And I said, well, you could do, an organic non-refined sugar. You could do a non-refined salt. You could do wheat that's not been desiccated with glyphosate. I said, that's chapter 1, 2, and 3 right there. But I'm like this this is one product of hundreds and hundreds of products that they have. Yeah. And you have to go, like I heard General Mills in the US are now asking farmers not to desiccate with glyphosate, their wheat. Yeah. So is that going to happen here in Australia? Are we going to see that, or are we going to have farmers like I've come across who said glyphosate will feed the world, we can't live without it, and it stopped no-till farming, and oh my gosh, it's just one of the most frustrating. Yeah, it's frustrating, yeah. And I've loved listening to you because I feel like, you know, you're on the ground, you're doing this, you're helping other farmers that are trying to figure it out. You know, that Grazing For Profit by RCS, RCS wasn't it? Like RCS. That seems to be something that people are really looking at, and maybe
that's a gateway for farmers, definitely, to get into that. And so they don't necessarily focus on quality of food, but it always comes down to it because they talk about well-being, they talk about the people stuff. And, you know, inevitably you end up going, well, what are you putting in your mouth and how does that make you think? And what are you thinking to put in your mouth in the first place? So, I guess back to your frustration, I share that frustration. However, I think it's about small steps. And again, in a similar vein, you know, when we look at, so that's the health stuff. It's frustrating. It's enormous problem. We know the benefits, but it's slow, hard slog. The other slow, hard slog currently is this, you know, the global crisis, and that's a really big topic. And you know, when you talk to farmers about, and I get frustrated with farmers because I think, isn't it obvious, you know, that we can change, but nonetheless, you know, it's an enormous problem. And when there are conversations with farmers about the global crisis, it's a huge responsibility that a lot of people are asking them to bear, right, or suggesting they should bear. Yes, we have the tools to do it, but not everyone's ready to use those tools. So, you know, when farmers are burdened almost with this, oh my God, it's up to me to save the planet, which is pretty much what a lot of people are saying.
Yeah,
that is a really tough gig. So I just say, look, let's just put the global thing to the side for a minute, okay? Because that's big. You know, that's like, who's going to take that on? We have to consider it, and we're all working towards it. But let's put that aside. Let's focus on something that you are in control of, right? And that's the boundary of your farm and the activities and the management that happens on there, and the way you live your life and the way your family lives their lives. That is such an easier way, such a more comprehensible, more easily manageable conversation to have with a farmer. It's like, okay, I can do that because, you know, the more farmers that are doing that, they're all contributing in their small and big way to the global crisis. And I know that's it's a simple way to put it, but we need simple ways for people to, you know, to come to the party. You know, for people to transition. Just think about what you're doing, because every farm has its own microclimate. You know, that microclimate is contributing to the macroclimate, you know, which contributes to the whole global climate. So, you know, I'm trying to sort of, in what we teach and how we approach this whole topic, we try and not dumb it down, but just keep it simple, you know. And that's one of the things that, you know, RCS and other holistic management educators and groups focus on, is like exactly that. Focus on what's in your control, because there's a whole lot of stuff in your world and business that is not in your control. And if you keep focusing on that, you are going to go nuts, you know, and you're going to, you know, it's so frustrating. So, I mean, you know, I don't know. What do you think the low-hanging fruit here is in terms of health? You know, what are the simple things that people can do or say or change to sort of, you know, to get our populace just more considerate of their health and the food?
Could I jump in here to both of you, that as a person who isn't aware of all the farming principles or understand it, but obviously very passionate about it, I'd invite you both, you've both made comments, you and Cindy, that Cindy, for instance, when she looked at from a laboratory point of view, as in the past said that she didn't realise or think about the animals, that it's always been done that way. You yourself said you just saw it as being a provider of some sort of thing that you called food, and you went along your ways. I invite you both to think about the switch, the turn, the change for you, what clicked for you, and then for you both to encourage and teach that because it's that little gap there, the transition, the change, the opening for the conversation, the ability to even think slightly differently. You've got a company called Changing Habits, Cindy, and beautiful Charlie has said Changing Habits a number of times. Would it not be a great idea for those of you, even if it is 10% of you that are into regenerative agriculture, to come together, because it's usually the tsunami of change that will occur through a group of people, a small group of people with the same ideal that inspires us at a soul level to look at the big picture, to have us want to change. If I could invite both of you to think like that, I would love to hear you both speaking on that platform.
It's about, I think, the nutritionists and the farmers coming together, and that's what I think it is. It used to be, we were separated. The farmers did their thing and the nutritionists did their thing. But I think now this is a time for us to be on the same stage and the same platform together, talking about the importance of nutrient-dense foods, and then the farmer talking about the production of these nutrient-dense foods and what it takes in order to get them. And when we do that, we eat less. It's just so obvious when you're not needing like a loaf of bread every day to keep you going, because when you have nutrient-dense food, one piece of bread, if you've made it from the way the Italians make it, is what is all you need for subsistence, as opposed to one loaf. And a small piece of meat and some vegetables is going to help, rather than the biggest steak you've ever seen in town. And that's me, Charlie. I don't know about you.
Well, I totally agree. I mean, I think in the perfect world that the agriculture department and the health department would be the one department, because they're just so intrinsically linked. I guess if there was a really robust, and I'm not suggesting that the government and its department has all the silver bullets, but if there was a robust agricultural department that was really focusing on outcomes beyond the economic ones, then the health department would probably only be 10% of that whole super department, because we wouldn't have the problems. We wouldn't have people going to the doctor. So back to your question, though, I think it is crazy that as farmers we don't think about, we are commodity producers. We produce a commodity. We're not thinking about food. Most farmers don't grow their own food or don't eat their own food. Wheat farmers don't generally go and get a dipper of grain out of their silo and make a loaf of bread. A lot of farmers, a lot do, but there's a large percentage of farming population don't grow fruit and vegetables, and they've got thousands of acres. They're not that way inclined, because they've grown up, as I did, in a conventional farming family where the focus was just not anything to do with food and nutrition. It was convenience of food and the economics of it, both from a production point of view, but also from a consumption point of view. So, I mean, I think it's a wonderful idea. I would love for that to be, those conversations and those conferences and those, I think there's talk of a roadshow in sort of northern New South Wales in early next year that I'm hopefully involved in, which will be combining, I understand, regenerative ag practices, some practical stuff, with some psychology about farming and regenerative ag, and just sort of farming families, mental health, and nutrition and meditation. And I think that again, total self care. Yeah, farmers, we've got to just, we've got to start thinking that way. And I think really the key, I think the key to a lot of this is the women. The farming, because the guys will do their stuff. They're just stubborn, and I guess I still am a bit, but guys, it's the women in the rural communities that really are running the show. And at the end of the day, and they're the ones who have the most influence, I believe, or they should have, on their families and their husbands. And because it's women who are going to pick up the meditation stuff first. It's the women who are going to start thinking about nutrition first. It's them who's going to be thinking about their children's health more. Truth be known, that's just it is. The blokes are busy enough fixing pumps and sowing crops. But I think this is the if there's low-hanging fruit, if I can call it that, it's really the power of women in rural communities that that can change this thing so much quicker than, they're there, they're on the ground, they're in the house, they're there, 24/7. Whereas me on a podcast or a book that's on a table, there's only so much exposure that a farmer will take of that sort of thing. But if the wives and partners can be that source of change and inspiration, I think I reckon that's going to be the biggest change or the biggest impact we can have. So you girls, you're doing a wonderful job, and I reckon all power to you, because if you can really empower and inspire women out there, I think that it's going to be a lot easier job for sure.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I hate to finish this up. I know everyone's busy and it's probably now dark outside where you were standing, Charlie. But I hope I can just say what a privilege it's been for the three of us to have you on our show. I can see why you are Cindy's new boyfriend. I've said it. It's out there. It's done. We all love you, and really thank you from the bottom of our hearts for being a trailblazer in an industry I can imagine is tougher than we would ever give it thought to as far as creating change. So to know that you're out there doing the work for us, we just want to say thank you. And to our listeners, is there one final message you have for any of our listeners apart from us girls can rule the world?
Yeah, well, that's a big one to go out on. Look, I think just one thing I didn't say before, which I guess about wellbeing and self-care, there was a survey we were involved in last year that was done by Dr. Jackie Shermer at ANU in Canberra there, and Mark Gardner, he's a HM holistic management practitioner at Dubbo. They surveyed a number of regenerative farmers and compared those results to some thousand or more conventional farmers, let's just say, and against a lot of different KPIs, economic and social and health and so on. And some of the really interesting results of that was that farmers who were using regenerative practices were significantly of a higher sense of well-being than non-conventional. And I think, it's only a pilot study, but it's significant and lots more work needs to be done. So I think from a farmer's point of view, there's a lot of really good reasons to get into this sort of agriculture. And I think from an eater's point of view, it's just about being informed and reconnecting with nature, because once you do, you can't help but want to know and eat better food, Only eat what your grandmother would recognise. So, or your great-grandmother, So I think it's really exciting. I'm nervous, I'm anxious about it, I'm optimistic, but I'm actually quite excited because there's so much opportunity. We're at such a crazy point in the history of the earth. It's actually really exciting because there's so much that we can change and so much positivity to come out of it. So, and you girls are doing a wonderful job at promoting and advocating and being the source of change as well. So, thank you for having me on the show, and I really enjoyed it, and I can't wait to meet you all in person.
If people wanted to follow you or to find out more about you, I know you're on Instagram. Could you just quickly tell us how they can find you?
Yes, Instagram is Charlie Arnott 1. Facebook is Charlie Arnott. Just Google grass-fed beef naturally. If you just go Google my name, it'll probably come up there. Website is charliearnott.com.au. We're doing a bit of a revamp on the website soon, so but that's going to be a really good, and is now a focal point for information, videos. We go mad with interviewing farmers and non-farmers alike about what they're doing in the regenerative ag space or the food space. So I might have to interview you guys for a podcast one day too when I get my act together.
Well, we'd be honoured. We'd be absolutely honoured. I mean,
well, that was so fun. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're incredible. And to all our listeners, I'm sure you'll agree, it's been a phenomenal hour and a bit. And to have someone with Charlie's knowledge and sense of compassion and obviously heart and soul and commitment to the ongoing beauty of this planet, let alone Australia, I think we can all say it's been a privilege. If you'd like to place a comment, then please go to facebook.com/up-for-a-chat. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback. You can also go to thewellnesscouch.com/up-for-a-chat. And if you have any questions for Charlie, go to him direct, or of course, you can certainly post onto our social media platforms. To be honest with you, Cindy and Karen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Cindy, for bringing Charlie to us. And if all of you are interested in becoming part of the ripple effect that's changing the world, then tune in next week, give us a 5-star rating, and we look forward to talking to you all then. Take care now. Bye for now.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.